Welcome and thank you for being part of this WorkSafe webinar, the evolving energy sector and the role of WorkSafe. My name is Chris McKenzie. I'll be your host for today's session, joined by two WorkSafe Victoria experts. Danae Campbell is the Principal Process Safety Analyst at WorkSafe Victoria. As a key member of the Chemical Safety Division, Danae acts as a mentor to the WorkSafe Major Hazards team. Welcome, Danae.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here.
And Stuart Duncanson has just been appointed as Group Leader of WorkSafe's new Renewable Energies construction team. He joined WorkSafe in 2019 as a Senior Engineer in major construction projects. Prior to joining WorkSafe, Stuart managed engineering for wind farm construction projects in Victoria and held roles in project management and engineering across oil and gas, mining and infrastructure projects. G'day, Stuart.
G'day, Chris, and everybody else out there.
Thank you both for joining us. In the first half of today's session, we'll cover off the following key topics: the evolving nature of Victoria's renewable energy sector, WorkSafe regulations and roles in this dynamic market, and recommendations to operators of renewables projects. Then we're going to open it up for audience questions via the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to enter your questions anytime from now on, so we've got them ready for when it comes to the Q&A. Let's get straight into it. Just last week, the Victorian government increased its targets for clean energy and emissions reduction, setting the state on course to reach a 95% share of renewables on its electricity grid by 2035. The new targets boost the existing interim renewable energy target, or VRET as it's called, from 50% to 65% by 2030, and the emissions reduction target from 50% on 2005 levels by 2030 to 75 to 80% by 2032. The government has also set a longer-term goal for the state to reach net zero emissions compared to 2005 levels by 2045, 5 years ahead of most of the rest of the country. And as Victoria moves towards these targets, the energy sector across a number of industry and technology types is evolving. Meeting these targets will bring forward significant investment in new renewable energy projects across the state. So with the targets set, it's the ways in which we reach them that will impact all of our lives in every way we live. Starting with you, Danae, what is WorkSafe's role in this changing landscape?
Yeah, look, thanks, Chris. It's really great to be here because today we're going to talk about two topics really close to my heart. We're going to talk techie and we're going to talk safety. So let's kick on, let's do it. So after the elimination and mitigation of environmental harm, safety is the next largest component of the social license of the technology change that's happening around us. And there are legislated safety duties for designers, constructors and operators of these new facilities. WorkSafe's job is to monitor, guide and hold persons and organisations accountable if necessary. And we do this in a number of ways. In safety, we know that those that create the risk are best placed to manage that risk. And our inspectors and technical specialists, like my job, we make site visits to facilities, either in construction operation. We use our powers under the OH&S and Dangerous Goods Acts and regs. We make inquiries, we provide advice, lots of advice, and enforce legislative requirements if necessary. We also have a role, quite a techie role, in referral authority for land use planning applications for future dangerous goods sites, and some parts of the role in the EPA's development licence sites for some facilities. We work very, very closely with government agencies and we provide advice at various stages of a project's development. We also undertake dangerous good, tanker and DG packaging approvals. Another aspect really is internal to WorkSafe. We have a role in educating ourselves. And we do this by being curious about the activity in the market and obviously responding to the ever-changing process policies being driven by federal and state governments. And we're also keeping a very close eye on other jurisdictions which are outside of Victoria. And Chris, look, I'm so curious that the whole department, the whole of WorkSafe is so curious about the new technology coming to market. And we're always learning to ensure we're across the hazards that this technology may propose to the community.
Thanks, Danae. And staying with you, things are changing with some pace and urgency to achieve the set targets. What do we actually mean by evolving energy sector? What are some of its characteristics when compared to what we have now? And what are some of the characteristics of the change that will need to be managed?
Yeah, look, there's a lot going on here, so I'm going to try and give a pretty simplified wrap-up paragraph today. But firstly, we need to focus on the very simple fact. If you do not need that joule of energy, then you do not need to create it. And hence, if you don't create it, there's no hazard, essentially. So first, the evolving energy sector is driven by the desire to make our existing energy systems and all those end user applications much, much, much more efficient. And it's really, really pleasing to see some of the end user applications now are actually going to be a hell of a lot more efficient than what we're going to have today. So secondly, each sector is then going to enact different technological solutions to decarbonise. And this is where the techie comes in, really. So a lot of cases, and you've been hearing about it a lot in the media, this is going to involve electrification. And in Victoria, this will be predominantly sourced, like most of the other parts of the country, from solar and wind, both wind on and now offshore, with the Commonwealth water allocations in the Gippsland and Otway now being opened up for gigawatt scale wind farm facilities. And of course, we're going to have to firm this up with some storage. And this seems to be predominantly batteries. But we're going to see, and we should expect to see, proposals for pumped hydro in the northeast of our state, and to a smaller extent, some of the more novel applications: compressed air, thermal storage, chemical storage. And if it isn't very obvious to people already, to decarbonise our homes, our businesses, and our light vehicles, we're going to need a hell of a lot more electricity than we've got today. So in other cases, we're going to have replacement fuel sources. We're going to have things like hydrogen, ammonia, biomethane, methanol, naphtha, created from recycled plastics, or even dangerous goods like methylcyclohexane. And there are many different potential types of hazards to the employees and the community, but I'd like to highlight two different ones today. So during the change, there's going to be many more workers that have the potential to be exposed to key construction hazards: falls from height, dropped object, mechanical impact. And the hazards are going to be more dispersed from relatively small numbers because it's a mature industry. Our energy system at the moment is mature, with small numbers of people working in coal mines and the existing electrical generators. But what we're talking about is thousands of individuals installing and maintaining wind and solar assets, hydro, battery farms, poles and wires across the whole state. We're talking about decent change. And hence why Stuart, our construction expert's here today, to talk about this. And tomorrow there's a webinar by Rick Fisher about preparing safe work method statements for high-risk construction work. And there's another hazard I want to highlight today, and that's particularly about chemicals. And our main front runners, the ones you'll hear about, hydrogen, ammonia, have their own unique hazards. And to be honest, they're not well understood by most of society. There's flammability, high pressure, cryogenic handling, low ignition energies, and toxicity for ammonia as well. Many, many, many more people will need to be trained up on the safe handling of these dangerous goods. It isn't as simple as saying that a diesel mechanic in a workshop who's used to handling a product that is a combustible liquid that doesn't ignite easily can easily switch to maintaining a truck with compressed or a liquefied hydrogen transmission and tank system. The need to retool our facilities and retrain our people is significant and can't be underestimated, and it really hasn't, because there's been so much money in recent times being thrown into training.
Thanks, Danae. Let's bring you in now, Stuart. Projects involving hydrogen, ammonia, biogas, wind, solar and battery storage are emerging with the move to renewable energy sources happening across the state. If we focus on solar and wind projects for a moment, there are currently almost 700 megawatts of projects operational in Victoria. However, I understand there are a further 6,400 megawatts of projects under construction or in planning. What does that look like on the ground now and into the future?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Well, as we move towards our legislated renewable energy targets, we're going to see an acceleration of renewable energy construction projects in Victoria. We, as a nation, are installing renewable energy generation facilities at a greater rate than any time in our history. But if we're going to meet our 2050 targets, or for Victoria, the 2045 targets as they are now, then by the end of this decade, we actually have to double our installation rate for renewable energy generation. And then by the end of 2040, we're going to need to double it again. You mentioned that we have around 6.5 gigawatts of onshore wind and solar projects, either in construction or approved. That's excluding offshore wind. But if we also include the projects that are currently undergoing that approval process, then this figure actually jumps to over 11 gigawatts. I've got a graph to show you that will give you a feel for just how big this change is going to be for Victoria. And this graph shows the grid scale solar generation in Victoria on the left-hand side and the grid scale wind generation in Victoria on the right-hand side, with the dark blue sections being our currently operating facilities, and the rest being the pipeline of projects, either what is in construction approved or going through that approval process. So from this graph, you can see that our current generation capacity in Victoria is quite small compared to what's coming up. In fact, that pipeline of projects represents an increase of around 300% to Victoria's renewable energy generation capacity. But what this graph doesn't really show us is the timeline for when these projects will begin operation. But we can, if we look at Victoria's generation capacity requirements over the next decade, we can get a bit of a feel for what is coming up in the near future. And this is shown on the next graph that I've got. So this is from the Australian Energy Market Operator, their predictions out to 2035 for Victoria, with the left-hand column of each one being our current generation capacity, and then the right-hand column being what is anticipated by 2035. So you can see that for coal, our current generation capacity is a bit over 4 gigawatts, and by 2035, that will essentially be gone, with that void taken up, as Danae touched on, by an increase in wind and solar generation and complemented by battery storage capacity. And actually, just as a quick side note, as an example of how quickly things are accelerating in this space, Victoria has recently announced 6.3 gigawatts of energy storage as a target for 2035. So given that, the energy storage shown in that previous graph is actually way too low, and will just continue to accelerate in that space. As you would have seen from that graph too, the increase in wind and solar generation capacity is much larger than our decrease in coal generation and other types of generation. And again, as Danae touched on, this is because of Australia's combined efforts to not only decarbonise our electricity grid, but to also decarbonise things like our transport network, our commercial industries, and even our residential communities, all of which leads to an increase in energy demand or electricity demand. So that means that in 10 years' time, you'll likely not be filling up your car with petrol, but instead charging it up with wind and solar energy.
Staying with you, Stuart, where are these projects happening? And could you give us an idea of the type of construction scale that's involved here?
Yeah, so Victoria has what are called renewable energy zones, or designated renewable energy zones. And I can show you these on a map. These light green shaded areas are the renewable energy zones. And these are areas where we have either existing or planned electrical transmission infrastructure that will allow the energy generated by those facilities to efficiently enter our grid. This map also shows the types of projects that will be in each area. And I'm sure it's no surprise, but the solar farms will be in the sunny north of our state, and the wind farms will typically be in the coastal areas or along the windy plains. But bear in mind that map is fairly high level, and there will be a combination of projects in each of the different areas. But you can see that the renewable industry is going to be extremely busy with design, development, construction, and operation of these renewable projects right across our state, from north to south and east to west. Many of the projects are massive in scale, and the hazards encountered will be fairly typical, I guess, of what we see across other major construction programs in Victoria. But just to give you an example of the size of some of these projects, there's one wind farm coming up for construction very soon in the southwest of our state, the Golden Plains Wind Farm. And it's actually going to be the largest onshore wind farm in the Southern Hemisphere, although how long that record stands remains to be seen. But it's going to be 215 wind turbines, each with a capacity of 6 megawatts, which will produce enough power for 750,000 homes annually. And you can see here in this graph, it's not just the scale of the overall project that is massive, but it's the turbines themselves. So this picture here shows the Golden Plains wind turbine against some of Melbourne's iconic structures. And you can see that it's taller than Melbourne Central Tower. There's actually another wind farm planned for Victoria, the Delburn Wind Farm, which will be constructed to the south of the Latrobe Valley. And it's going to be even bigger again. So it's going to have a blade tip height of 250 metres for those turbines, which makes it just as tall as Rialto Tower. So next time you're in Melbourne, have a look up at the Rialto Tower, imagine a turbine next to it just as big as it, and you'll start to get a bit of a sense for just how big these turbines really are.
Incredible. Thanks, Stuart. They are definitely massive. Danae, coming back to you now. As we mentioned earlier, you work in the major hazards team at WorkSafe. What are the chemical or dangerous goods hazards that WorkSafe will be looking out for in the renewables world?
Yeah, look, there's a general tendency of the community to equate renewable energy with low risk or inherently safe. Everybody, don't get excited. I said inherently safe, not overall safe. But this perception needs to be very carefully managed. Lithium batteries are dangerous goods and can have localised fire events if not handled or commissioned correctly. So when installing your large-scale battery system, there are a number of different types of batteries available, and they have different ways of managing fire events. Some have suppression systems installed, while others are designed to burn out. Both have advantages and disadvantages. And duty holders need to consider the system that best suits the potential bushfire risk in the area they're going to be located and the proximity to the local population. And for batteries, duty holders also need to consider the technology the battery has installed to prevent the battery from entering a runaway state. So moving to another sector, in our port system and the land surrounding them, in order to decarbonise, we could potentially see a steady state of replacement of petroleum and other fuel oils with chemicals that are equally flammable or, in the case of ammonia, toxic. Just as existing facilities exist today, risk control measures will be and can be put in place to manage these facilities safely. However, for large-scale storage and handling, there needs to be a high level of process safety competency in the organisations that operate these facilities. Of course, large-scale facilities will be licensed major hazard facilities, and this is a key part of the assurance to Victorians and to the community listening today. It's one of the key reasons my job and all the people who I work with throughout Dangerous Goods, Chemical Safety Division, major hazard facilities, we exist to confirm that competency exists where it's needed. So essentially, our large-scale dangerous goods sites and major hazard facilities of today, they're situated on large tranches of land with associated buffers, with access to pipeline corridors, employees, supporting industries, ports, and hence they're going to be our large dangerous goods sites and MHFs of the future. They're just going to be deploying different technology and materials. So retention of land use buffers around these facilities is very important for our future. And it's also worth noting, Chris, that we've identified another risk, and that's related to the change. And that's relating to the loss of containment from ageing assets. A potential consequence of the rapid corporate move to renewables is a potential, I'm saying a potential, of a decline in maintenance spending on existing assets. And we are very, very, very carefully monitoring the asset integrity practices of Victoria's existing major hazard facilities and large dangerous goods, many of which currently supply energy and fuels to this market to ensure that appropriate funds are being spent on keeping our assets well maintained while we make this transition.
Thanks, Danae. Have you got any specific examples here that illustrate the risks that we're talking about moving forward?
Yeah, look, you stumped me on that one. I thought I answered that one, Chris, really.
No worries there. You've talked about those solar and wind generation combined with the batteries and pumped hydro. So, Stuart, I might come to you there. What is WorkSafe's actual jurisdiction with respect to construction of these massive projects that we're talking about?
Yeah, well, the Victorian occupational health and safety regulatory framework applies to all defined workplace within the Victorian jurisdiction. So this includes, for example, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Dangerous Goods Act, and their associated regulations. But WorkSafe also work closely with the state's other regulatory agencies as needed.
Thanks, Stuart. Danae, I hear you're working on a new project that may expand WorkSafe's jurisdiction onto the water. That sounds fascinating. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, something a bit different for us for WorkSafe Victoria. However, just something to harmonise us with all the other safety regulators around the country, really. So yeah, in September 2021, a new clause was added to the front of the OH&S regs, which essentially enabled the major hazard facilities part of the regs to capture some very specific projects within Victoria's coastal waters and sea limits for the very first time. So the examples of the projects have currently announced are the 2 liquefied natural gas FSRUs, so the floating storage regasification units, which are in various stages of development and environmental approval in Melbourne's west. So basically, with these new regulations, we were looking to the future. So globally, the possibility exists for new technology which is evolving, and it has the possibility to move into our jurisdiction for the very first time. And WorkSafe as a regulator needs to position itself to manage these issues. So an example of a new technology currently in global design is an AFSRB, an ammonia floating storage regasification barge. But that's not all. We could see LNG or hydrogen bunker barges refueling in our port system, the potential for repurposing of offshore gas rigs to production facilities, for floating hydrogen electrolyzers sitting alongside the offshore wind farms. Once we get that excess electricity in our system from those offshore wind farms, the solutions for decarbonisation become quite endless. And I'm not making any announcements on behalf of any corporate organisations. We don't have any of these I'm talking about in Victoria yet, but WorkSafe is a regulator that's keeping its eye firmly onto what is possible. And most of you smart buddies out there will know that a lot of this is going to be handled by AMSA and by NOPSEMA particularly for Commonwealth waters. However, if it sits within the 3 nautical mile mark and it's moored in our ports, WorkSafe has the potential to have jurisdiction if we determine the project if it has scheduled materials.
Great, thanks, Danae. Stuart, I imagine that as the renewables environment is exploding, solid partnerships are extremely vital. And this is a point we've actually already had a couple of questions on through the chat box. Who are the sorts of groups WorkSafe collaborates with to help ensure renewables projects, either publicly or privately operated, are doing so safely?
Yeah, so we work alongside many different partners to achieve complementary goals. So organisations like Energy Safe Victoria, the Environmental Protection Agency, Department of Energy, Land, Water and Planning, Fire Rescue Victoria, local councils, as well as, of course, employers, employee groups and community representatives. And while our primary function is and will remain regulation, we're also very keen to work with industry in the proactive sense so that we can collectively identify and mitigate potential issues before they actually arise or turn into incidents and injuries. And actually in this regard, I'm quite pleased to acknowledge that there are a number of operators in the wind sector in particular that have been very proactive in setting up those collaborative safety forums and events to promote better safety outcomes in the industry. And have also been proactive in terms of seeking engagement with WorkSafe. The renewables sector will, as you mentioned at the start, affect every one of us in every sector in a variety of ways. So the more we can collaborate to create safe workplaces, the better for everybody.
Thanks, Stuart. So, Danae, given that future renewables technologies and issues are still a little bit unknown, can we say that WorkSafe's regulations are future ready?
Look, there's a simple answer to this question, Chris, and it's an emphatic yes. The OH&S Act and regs are definitely future ready. Robin-style performance-based legislation has a lot to offer this sector, regardless if it's a chemical hazard close to my heart or a construction hazard, which is close to Stuart's heart. The basic requirement of hazard ID, know what can go wrong, Assess it, how big and bad can it be, and adoption of risk controls has stood the test of time across many types of hazards and is seen as suitable for this change. With regards to the Dangerous Goods Act and regulations, in 2020, QC Palmer conducted an independent review, and in mid-October this year, the Victorian Government released its report on its findings. So the government has asked WorkSafe to work very closely with the Department of Justice and Community Safety and various other government departments and agencies to further assess the recommendations that require further review or are supported in principle. So in the next period, we will see new regulations for dangerous goods in Victoria, and this will consider future hazards associated with the future fuels and technologies. For large-scale chemical and energy projects, the Future Fuels CRC, the Cooperative Research Centre, prepared a report for the whole country and declared the MHF regulations more than ready, with standardised thresholds, clear frameworks and expectations set across Australia for hydrogen, ammonia and other bioflammables. So for the gas transmission sector, there is still a fair bit of work to be done, as the safety and regulatory frameworks there were not initially set up for a large-scale injection of hydrogen biogas. However, Energy Safe Victoria is getting on with this very important reform work here, and WorkSafe Victoria is involved as required. So in short, Chris, the Safety Act and regs are looking pretty good, and we're making them even better, and we're getting on with the necessary reform work to do so.
That's great to hear, Danae. And finishing up with you, as a major Victorian regulator, what would your safety advice be to organisations looking to invest in a renewable energy work or build a project?
Yeah, look, I'm so glad you asked me this question, Chris. I'd like to start right at the top at board level. So there's a few points I'd like to get across here, so please be patient with me. So at board level, those that are investing in these facilities, it's about understanding the key things that are keeping the construction, the design and the final operation of these facilities safe. So it's all about the KPIs, the information the boards are receiving in order to make good decisions. So there are plenty of good training packages out there for boards in process safety, high construction hazards. They're run by the engineering associations of this country. It'll give an awareness of the types of hazards that boards could experience, types of KPIs they could be monitoring in systems, key systems in management of change, operational control, permit to work assurance, causality and consequence. It's the key difference in our industry is about causality. Causality typically isn't something that can be easily seen, and consequence is typically much higher in our industries than in others. Next, I'll talk to the operators and designers. Operators and designers, work out your jurisdictional requirements. Of course, you're going to do it anyway. And come speak to us early, particularly if you're building something large and novel. And they do that already. That's a natural part of my day-to-day work. Many of these projects are multi-stage and multi-years in development. And there's little excuse really for not bringing your regulator with you. We're going to be there anyway. Bring us with you. The most effective and cheapest decisions to improve safety are done at design stage. So understanding key hazards is vital. It's typically very, very expensive to resolve safety issues once operations have begun. Future designers and operators of the facilities need to have a really clear set of procedures to follow with respect to the type of hazard studies they're going to undertake at various stages of a project's life cycle, from concept and land selection, front engineering to detailed design. A lot of these projects do commence at pilot stage. But just because it's a pilot plant, don't discount or discredit valid risk controls that will need to be installed at a later date after startup and scale up. It's really, really, really important to understand what keeps you safe, and that is your risk controls. And this does often start with a review of the technological standards available for both the technology selected and the materials of construction. But for hydrogen, these are evolving. The Australian Standards Committee, ME93, the Hydrogen Technologies Committee, was formed in early 2019, and they are working exceptionally hard on this issue. So in the interim, while the Australian standards aren't quite yet ready, they're evolving and people are bringing new and novel technology to market, you need to go back to good engineering first principles and design. Hazard ID. Hazard ID is appropriate for the project and hazards you're running. Risk assessment, selection of risk controls. And with the risk controls, should clearly, you don't design safety to a standard, you design safety to reduce for SAFARP. And it wouldn't be a WorkSafe talk, Chris, if we didn't talk about SAFARP. So everybody, after the elimination of risk, obviously you move into reducing risk so far as reasonably practicable. So SAFARP is what you know about the likelihood of the hazard eventuating, the degree of harm that could result, what a person should know or reasonably know, the availability, tongue-tied, it's a bit of a mouthful sometimes, availability and suitability of the ways to eliminate or reduce the hazard or risk, and lastly, the cost, and that's SAFARP. And we'd love to see all these projects get up, as risk-free as possible.
That's great advice, Danae. Thank you so much. And thank you to Stuart as well for your insights today. It is clear that this generational change to a renewable energy future will affect us all. And Victoria is facing a new set of challenges to meet these targets, and WorkSafe Victoria will be playing an important part. So we still do have some time left in this session to take some of your questions from the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to pop in a question there if you've got something you want to ask Danae and Stuart. I might kick off with both of you. Stuart, I'll start with you. A question, an anonymous question here asking, where are the skilled workers going to come from to construct these projects? Is there a skills gap, and do we need more training to make sure these projects are constructed safely?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Chris. It's a great question. And it is one that is being looked at by varying levels as well. So I know there's quite a few organisations gearing up in that space to be able to provide training. So one example is, I think it's Federation Uni out at Ballarat. They've actually installed a turbine or a sort of a model turbine at their campus, which they're going to be using to train up people for exactly this. In other areas outside of sort of wind, I know there's apprenticeship programs and that sort of thing that are starting to look at, the hydrogen training and that sort of thing. So yeah, definitely there is going to be a large requirement for a new workforce. And training is going to be absolutely key to enabling these projects to go forward.
Thanks, Stuart. I've got another anonymous question here. We talked about collaboration, and Danae, you've spoken about the amount of government involvement and different bodies involved. A question here, how is Energy Safe Victoria involved in this renewables world as we move forward? And how does WorkSafe's engagement with Energy Safe Victoria look from our perspective?
Yeah, look, the manager for gas safety installations for Energy Safe Victoria has me and her on speed dial most days. That's okay. So from a general day-to-day, my role at practitioner level, we're always working together on the new and different projects. So essentially our battery limits. In engineering terms, we call this our technical battery limits. What's your jurisdiction? What's my jurisdiction? And projects often have multi-jurisdiction depending on what they are. So Energy Safe definitely has jurisdiction over pipelines. It can, under its the pipeline safety regs and the gas industry reg acts. So both WorkSafe's dangerous goods regs and at the front end of the major hazard facilities regs, there are exclusions, and the opposite way in their regs too. So typically WorkSafe will take the facility component, the block where the products are differently made, chemicals, and Energy Safe take the pipelines. And we all work together essentially. They're both safety case regimes. There's lots of consultation that goes on with the industry affected on who's going to do what when, essentially. So that's how it sort of works in practice. And at the up level next up, there are roles. My manager has a role where she talks more in policy and enacting how we work collaboratively together for sharing information, and also when the regs require review, their regs, our regs, working together, consultation. So it's ongoing and it's constant. It is driven a little bit by activity. So what's coming, what's existing in the market, and what's going into the market, and the advice is mostly given to the individual operators.
If I can jump in there as well, Chris, just in terms of the construction of these projects for particularly onshore wind and solar farms. So these are, at the end of the day, energy generating facilities. So ESV have a lot of jurisdiction when it comes to that space, even during the construction of the facility. But we work very closely with ESV and their renewables team as well through the construction of the projects. And as we go into this boom of renewables, I expect that there will be very tight collaboration throughout the life cycle of the projects all the way through.
Great, thanks, Stuart. I might stay with you. We've got another anonymous question coming through in terms of any learnings that WorkSafe has identified from other renewable energy projects, either around the country and other jurisdictions or internationally, that might be applied here.
Yeah, good question. It's definitely something that we're monitoring all the time. We're speaking with our interstate counterparts as well, and also looking overseas at issues we see there. There is an organisation out of the UK called Safety On, and they do a really great job of, it's an industry-led organisation, and they do a great job of monitoring trends across the industry. Some really insightful information there. So, but really, the hazards that we're talking about, although these are different types of construction projects, the big five hazards are still the same. So we're talking about falls from heights, dropped objects, electrical risks, mobile plant and people-plant interface, potential for structural collapse. I guess, although maybe not unique to some of these projects, one of the characteristic hazards, I suppose, found on particularly onshore wind farms would be the sort of frequent mobilising of large cranes from one turbine to another. So, you're talking about 800-ton cranes that you set up, erect a turbine, and then move to the next turbine within a few days. And that scale of rigging and de-rigging cranes and moving them from one location to another is not really seen in any other industry. So there are unique aspects to it, but the hazards themselves are fairly similar across all construction industries.
Thanks, Stuart. And Danae, it's a good point from Stuart there that some of the hazards and risks are similar to what we see in other industries and construction projects, but there are clearly some unique risks and hazards as we move forward in renewables. Is there a need for WorkSafe to develop new guidance here, or is that something that we're looking into or something that we're going to be doing moving forward?
Yeah, look, I think we will for certain sectors. So for the major hazard facilities, Victoria already has a set of very mature, very well loved, very well thumbed over guidance that we work very closely with our industry for. I think there's because some of the technology, the technology for electrolyzers hasn't settled, essentially, particularly as we move into gigawatt scale. So that's what those standards committees are up and all about. So we're going to have to wait a little bit before we put out specific guidance on things like that. We do have some of the other jurisdictions moving on this a little bit early. So Queensland has a draft code of practice out for hydrogen end users applications and designs. They've got quite a lot of activity occurring in that sector. And WA has just put out a hydrogen guide too, as of this month in October. But when you have a quick look at this, particularly the WA guide, even they acknowledge that the technology isn't settled and you need to move back to first principles, hazard ID, identification to work out what the appropriate risk control measures will be for the sector. I think if we're moving to liquid flammables, Chris, we've got many well-regarded, maturely run terminaling facilities in the state already, and people drive past them each day in their lives. You can see them from the major bridges, the city ones. So storing something like methanol would not be seen as all that different in terms of the current hazards and risks in the community. It would just be business as usual, just swapping the chemical over essentially.
Thanks, Danae. You did mention hydrogen in there. We've had a couple of questions come through on the chat box in relation to hydrogen and how it's going to be part of the strategy. But there's also a question here in relation to hydrogen taking 2 times more energy than wind, solar and battery, and whether it's a good fit for the renewables energy future. Could you talk a little bit more about hydrogen as a whole, Danae, and how it fits into this picture?
Yeah, look, so there has to be some really good discussions that do go on how to decarbonise each sector and what's the most suitable energy source for the decarbonisation of the sector. Because essentially, in order to make hydrogen, you do need essentially energy. You need electricity and you need a fair bit of water. So for every kilo of hydrogen you make, you need 9 litres of water essentially. So there's no surprise there. Some of our very early hydrogen projects that being service station styles for the West are going to use recycled water. That just makes sense. So I think the question's very valid. I'm not going to talk economics today. It's not our role. We're going to talk safety. So in safety, we talk about a precautionary approach. We essentially talk about in the balance of all the things that are needed. The environmental social license come first. The safety social license is next. The precautionary approach exists over those. So the discussion needs to be have across the industry on how decarbonisation is going to occur, and selection has to be made for each sector. And it's a little bit too difficult to generalise today on how that's going to play out in our industries. We will need forms of hydrogen, whether they be in ammonia. We will need forms of biocarbon because we still need to make plastics. So we're going to need all those things, but how much, where they're made, how they're made, and how much additional energy that takes, it's all up for grabs, essentially.
Thanks, Danae. And just a final one for both of you, and it's more of a general question. Another anonymous one here. As these energy technologies develop, can either of you see one form of renewable energy taking dominance in Australia, or is there room for all of these types of energy moving forward?
I'll start and then go to Danae. I think, we're going to see complementary energy forms. Obviously, the sun's not shining all the time, the wind's not blowing all the time, but you've got both. You've got a fair chance to be generating electricity. Battery storage is going to be key to quite a lot of this, and that technology has come along in leaps and bounds, I think, in the last few years, definitely the last 5-10 years, and I expect we'll see a lot of developments in that space as well. So, I think it's going to be pretty exciting. A wide variety of industries out there at the moment, and who knows what new industries will come up in the future as well.
And Danae, a final thought?
Yeah, I think on that one, Chris, it's all about what the human experiences. So the day-to-day human will experience, I think, and sight electrification. But everything we have, everything we touch, everything we purchase needed energy and raw materials to make it. And so, in making our metals, glasses, mine sites, all those sort of stuff, all the things we rely on in our life, there's going to be the other energies in the mix that are need to make these products. So energy needs to make products. So I think that's how it's going to play out. So that's my view.
Great. Thank you, Danae. And thank you, Stuart, as well, for joining us today and answering those audience questions and giving us those insights into the renewable energy future of Victoria. Well, we hope that you have found this an interesting and informative session. This webinar will be available online via WorkSafe's website next month, so you can view it at any time. And we are also interested to hear about your experiences and feedback of WorkSafe Health and Safety Month sessions and the overall event this year. So please look out for an email we're going to send you with a quick survey. As a thank you for completing the survey, you can go into the draw to win one of 5 $100 gift cards. Winners will be notified in November. We'll note on the screen shortly a list of all the contacts that we've talked about today that you may find helpful if you're working in the renewables sector. If you have any requests for further information, we recommend you get in touch. And remember, if there is something you wanted to discuss urgently when you're at work, there is the WorkSafe advisory line you can contact. And don't forget, the emergency line is open 24/7. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.